Good evening, everybody. My name is Dan Schultz, and I am going to kick off the Finance Committee meeting Tuesday, May 6th. Start with a roll call.
Emily Henry present.
Zach Leops present.
Liam Mulhern present.
Ross Whiting present.
Mia Blitzstein present.
Robin Murphy present.
Dan Schultz present. Could I have a motion for the approval of last month's minutes?
So moved.
Mia Blitzstein, is there a second?
Second.
Zachary Epps, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, Mr. Sweigard.
Thank you very much, Dan. Let's get started. So, as always, we'll take a look at the interim financial results through the end of April for the 24-25 school year. After that, we'll turn over to taking a look at the 25-26 proposed final budget as part of the Act 1 timeline for progression of the budget for approval through June. After discussion of the budget, we will look at a traffic calming study and joint effort between the township and school district. And last but not least, we'll talk about how those items make their way to the legislative meeting for approval. All right, in the interest of time, skipping the balance sheet, looking right at our statement of revenues and expenditures for our general fund through April 30th, 2025. A couple things to point out. Some of our accounts are moving in the right direction. You can see that our revenue collection year over year is stronger. We're starting to see some of our expenditures level out that we were concerned about. However, we are not seeing our special education expense level out. This is still a driving factor in this year's financial results, largely due to an influx of children requiring additional services outside of the district, and will continue to exist likely into next year. Other items to note: operations is running hotter than last year. We're at 9.6 million versus 8.8 million, largely due to a number of reasons discussed in the past, mainly Epic and the opening of Epic and the cost to put the mods back in working shape, as well as a couple other large projects that occurred last summer. Overall, last year at this point in time, we were looking at a 19.9 million surplus change in fund balance. Now we're looking at a 17.8. So not quite as strong as last year, but still looking at a structural surplus for the end of the year at this point in time, with a month to go. June obviously is a very important month for school districts. Any questions on our year-to-date revenue and expenditures?
Any questions from the board?
Well, do you have a question about the students requiring special ed services outside of the district? Is there like one area in particular that is of need that we're not able to provide, or is it like a whole range of services?
So I look at it in student count totality, because frankly, I wouldn't be the department to ask
Okay.
for that question. That would be the special ed department.
Okay.
But we can get more information for you, certainly.
Just out of curiosity, since those numbers are rising, I'm just curious.
This is a trend occurring amongst the Delaware Valley. We're not unique to this. I think our uniqueness is just it was hitting other districts sooner than us.
Thank you.
Any other board questions?
I actually have a
Yes.
question. If this is a trend, is it a trend? I'm curious if it's a trend in the cost of services or a trend in the increase of classifications that need additional supports and services.
So it's both.
Okay.
So we have an uptick in the number of students, and there is increased pressure across the Delaware Valley to place these students. A lot of students typically go to what's called an approved private school with a 60-40 cost share with the state. Those slots are filled up, so now the full tuition is being borne by school districts, which has increased the cost. Those institutions are also struggling like school districts with funding, so a lot of the paraprofessional one-on-one costs are flowing back to school districts that were originally part of tuition. Now the cost of labor district or statewide and countrywide has shot up over the past couple of years due to inflationary pressure.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
there's a whole bunch of things.
It's a lot of, yeah, just increases in general from a variety of areas. So.
Are there any boundaries to what we can talk about? Because I know these are like legal matters we're talking about, but can we ask
You have to
anything
ask
in
the
these settings?
Huh?
Can we just ask anything about like our apps in these settings?
We may not be able to answer.
Okay, cool, just
but-
asking.
And if it's specific about special education, keep in mind, we would need to have Dr. Catrobone probably.
Well, that's kind of my point, because I think we have heard, in the information we've received, we've seen like one-on-one support being a theme. And so I don't know, this isn't a question per se, but I think within that, we probably do need a special information session or something along those lines, because whenever we come to talk about apps, I feel like it gets very detailed and somewhat complex about what the district offered, how we exhausted those services at one point, and then it does become a legal matter. And so I feel like we've had a couple questions, a couple board members around this, and it might be a point to back together.
So I'll try to summarize what I'm hearing around the table is that there is potentially interest from the board in getting a better understanding of what services are not being provided by our district that are requiring out of district placements, and whether there are strategic opportunities to expand the services we offer in ways that would maybe lower the overall cost because instead of doing out of district. So just understanding that picture, what the trends are. Obviously, it's a big and complicated topic, whether that is within financial affairs or a special session or a hybrid with ed affairs. Maybe Dr.
We can have that at 6 o'clock for next Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'd be a very relevant topic and a very relevant discussion.
And I know we have members of the public. If at any point there are questions among the public, please feel free to use the raise hand feature, at which point, when we go around for questions, we'll recognize you.
In the meantime, I'm going to minimize them so
Please.
we can see the tiny font screen.
Sure.
All right, when we look at our revenue versus expenditures on graphical form, which really helps demonstrate our structural strength as a district, you can see we're leveling out a little more on the revenue side, and it's really looking a lot better than the trajectory we were showing last month. So these things will happen because of timing. These curves in the chart, but at the end of the year, I think we should be okay. Looking at our local revenues year over year, we're seeing some positive things for this year in terms of our earned income taxes and our real estate transfer taxes continue to exceed the prior year. Real estate transfer taxes was somewhat of a surprise, so it's good to see strength in that department. It means the real estate market is still hot. Shellingham is still very viable. Delinquent taxes are also significantly stronger than last year in terms of collection. And last but not least, earnings on investments. I believe at the beginning of the year, we were looking at a very on-fire economy with fear of a federal funds rate cut, which would impact our earnings on investments. Obviously, a lot has changed in the world and in the economy since that has kind of forced the Fed to reevaluate that stance. So we haven't quite seen the number of cuts that we were anticipating. Thus, we're seeing a greater than anticipated collection earnings on investments, and not far off from last year as well, which, as a reminder, a couple of years ago, this went from $57,000 annually to now something that is somewhat reliable. Any questions on the interim statements? All right, now move on to talking about the proposed final budget. Just a reminder, as part of the budget timeline, the proposed final budget is posted for 20 days for public inspection before its final approval and advertised for 10 days before its final approval, which will occur on June 10th is the current timeline, unless there is significant uncertainty in federal funding or state funding that kind of rears its head between now and then. So keeping within that timeline, tonight's discussion is on the proposed final budget. The entirety of the proposed final budget will appear in a standardized state form of PD 2028 that we'll post on the website and I'll distribute to the board. It is a very, very long document with a lot more detail. Tonight we'll just focus on the higher level detail of the budget. So before we begin the budget, I just want to take a quick review of where we're headed at the end of the year. Current projection with information on hand is that we'll finish the year with a slight surplus, a $1.8 million surplus. And if you look at our projected revenue, 137.8 million versus our budget, we did better than budget on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, we were anticipating $134.3 million of expenditures. It's looking like we're going to surpass that largely because of anticipated ending results of our special education spend. And as mentioned earlier, we had some epic setup costs in our facilities department. All right, moving on to the proposed final budget. There's a lot of numbers here, but I want to focus on where the budget was last year. So we were budgeting $134 million for revenues, expenditures. Again, repeating our projected year-end financial results for 24-25 and anticipated $137.8 million of revenue collected, $136 million in expenditures, and how we get to here our proposed final budget for 25, the 25-26 school year. And this entire chart can really be boiled down to a few key items. One, in order to balance the budget of $140 million in expenditures, is going to require, without dipping into fund balance, it's going to require a tax increase. We are going to receive some funds from the state government that will be in excess of last year that will help with that funding process. And almost our entire budget is due to contractual salary changes buried here in regular programs, along with associated benefits, which is typical for a school district. 70% of what a school district does is employ teachers and staff. So when you have a 3% increase in staffing, which is less than the current state average, that's the driver of this number. And here, I believe we're going to need more funding to pay for IU special ed costs and out of school placement tuitions. So these are the numbers that are driving the budget for this year. The rest of this, between the pluses and minuses, is negligible. This just summarizes what I said for somebody who's picking up this document and not listening to the presentation. This proposed final budget is proposing a 3% increase in taxes. Part of the reason a 3% increase is needed is because of rising special education costs and wage pressure. And also part because our assessment is not quite as strong as it's been in the past. We have a slight assessment decline due to an uptick in tax appeals over the past year. And I also want to point out that our budget, and we'll get into this later, does not include all of the state increases proposed by the governor because we don't quite have enough information this time as to what those will look like. So trying to summarize the movement of our revenue budget year over year, we're looking at last year's budget of 134 million, and how do we get to 140? As mentioned, through real estate taxes, we are seeing growth in earned income tax. As wages grow, so does earned income tax. So the budget is adjusted to make up for that revenue differential. Our delinquent taxes were stronger than in prior years, and everything else is de minimis compared to those top three items on the local side. On the state side, I know I said I didn't include any increases from the state budget. This is actually last year's increase baked into this budget, along with last year's Ready to Learn tax equity grant. I believe at a prior meeting, Zachary, you may have mentioned, what are we doing with the proposed tax equity grant? I think the appropriate thing to do would be to, in June, pass another resolution like we did in the past, accepting the tax equity grant for the purposes outlined in the budget, so that if need be, we would have an additional tax equity allotment for the 25-26 school year. Just released on May 1st was additional money for the property tax relief through the homestead fund, the gambling money. So that was additional $400,000 added to the district's budget this year from that relief. And every year we get 50% of our PACERS, and which is our pension and Social Security wages paid back in the form of a state subsidy. So that is the last increase. All in all, it is a $2.4 million budget increase from the state. So in looking at the district as a whole, 1% of our revenue comes from the federal government and the general fund. 22% comes from the state and 77% comes from local sources. Of this 77%, 90% of that is real estate taxes, which means 70% of our entire budget is real estate taxes. Before I move on, any questions on anything discussed?
I have one question. The appeals, and you said that they're stronger, like we're getting more appeals. Are we losing the appeals, or we're acting like we could lose and that would impact what we collect?
So a lot of the appeals are a factor of the way the assessment is calculated on your tax bill. If you ever look at your tax bill and say, why is my assessment so low in my house bill? So the assessment is based off of the last time the county assessment was done, in 1998, Montgomery County. It was locked in place. And the state issues a step value factor, which helps turn that. It uses market factors to take your assessment, turn it into a market value number. And that step value ebbs and flows. And right now it's ebbing in a way, which is it's showing that assessment might be a little high for what it should be. And that's particularly drawn out in larger entities. Not so much.
So then people are getting lower tax. So when you say it's higher, it was higher in 1998 or whenever that was done than it is now.
What is the step value? The way this value calculates
Okay.
is it's indicating that locked in assessed rate is higher than what it has been in recent years. So, and that will swing the other way, and things will move the other way. But for now, that's kind of the market we're in.
Just another sort of question of that same neighborhood is, does that assessment, when people go to have their homes reassessed for value that relates to their taxes, right? Does the market value, like the fact that we have a hot real estate market currently in our township, increase your assessment, or is it not relevant?
So your assessment typically doesn't change unless you make a change to your property. So a lot of our assessments are baked in.
Okay.
The step value is how you determine how you back into assessed value versus market value. For example, so say your assessment is $100,000 and the step value is 2.5, and the implied market value is 250,000. But next year, if the step number comes out as 2.4, then the implied value is 240,000. So some years that step value goes up, and some years it goes down, and that's an opportunity for the district to issue a reverse appeal to capture the value for those persons.
What affects that?
And it typically doesn't play out in households because the dollar value is lower. It's typically in larger entities, like commercial.
Any other board questions? So, this is the last slide of the budget, or is there more?
There's more.
Okay.
We're just taking a break.
Sure. Then I will ask about, of what was presented, the reconfigurations that we have not voted on, but if they were to take place, I know that on balance, what we were told is essentially the operational increases in cost will be offset by decreases in different places, like it's cheaper because we're not having to maintain open Sparkus building, but there might be additional costs around busing temporarily. Is that in this budget, or is this budget kind of based on current configuration?
The budget's based on current configuration, so, I mean, we aren't planning on having those projects completed until 2027.
Right.
And as mentioned, that plan is to essentially shed almost $100,000 a square foot that we currently maintain. So that'll be reflected in future years, not in the current year.
And so if there were to be use of the mods and moving fifth grade next year, we might in December of next year be talking about, hey, that did manifest in slight changes to certain expenditures, but it's going to be within spitting distance of the budget. Thank you. Spitting distance, I think, is a formal accounting.
All right, so we talked about that assessed value, and looking at the assessed value release for the municipal taxes issued in January, we did see our first dip in a number of years. So very shortly, we should be receiving our tax duplicate for our bills on July 1st, and see what the impact of that is on our real estate taxes. So I did a zoom in for dramatic effect.
Yes, I was going to say.
And you zoom out, it's very flat.
Having fun, Josh. You see with data.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be on a Twitter account.
The accounting parties are really fun. All right, looking at earning on investments, this is this Loch Ness monster looking chart is the Federal Reserve rate versus our interest income. Obviously, as a school district, we are very restricted in what we can invest in. Mostly government instruments. So our interest investment income reflects what the Federal Reserve rate is pretty identically. So we can have some differences in how we invest our money. So we did park some money in some longer term investments. So hopefully if there is a swing in the Federal Reserve rate, we don't experience it as much as others. And we had some excess cash to do so. But obviously tomorrow is another big day and another potential rate change. So obviously that is something that's high on. All right, before we move on to expenditures. Yes. Sorry, just we talked about some of this stuff at us. All right, looking on the expenditure side, how do we go from 134 million in last year's budget to 140 million dollars in 2025-2026 proposed budget? As mentioned, we have contractual salary increases. We have the benefits associated with those increases, and we have special education, private school tuitions, and services in this number. And these are the two things that are really driving the budget for this particular year. Similar to the revenue side, I put together a graph of where we're spending our money as a district, and this is a pretty common ratio amongst all school districts. So almost 70% of what we do is salaries and benefits, is staffing, teachers, administrators, support staff, you name it. Professional services, these are like the services to BIU. Other contracted services, these are tuitions. These are, believe it or not, that our busing costs, our busing transportation contract is all through this line item. And these two pieces of the pie chart, even though they are coded separately, is all debt service. So at the end of the day, there is a very small amount of books and supplies. The rest of it is largely contractually spoken for and fleshed out in advance. And even most of the books and supplies are technology related, physically. Looking at our largest expenditure movers, number one since 2011 to 2012 has dramatically been our pension expense, the pension expense for the district. And in the year 2000, our contribution rate was around 1%. Now our contribution rate is up at 34% and is one of our largest expenditures. Also, we saw significant charter school growth back during COVID. That has flatlined over the past couple of years, which is a positive. But these are essentially all, for the most part, virtual students. Lately, with our efforts in collective bargaining, we've managed to flatline our healthcare costs, which were growing in double digits in prior years. And obviously, we haven't had any new projects in recent memory, so our debt service has flatlined as well. And our transportation costs, again, COVID caused a large dip in transportation, but if we were to bridge that gap, we're seeing a relatively stable transportation cost. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of these expenses are in essence mandated expenses from the state that we don't have any control of. Pension is a required contribution by school law. The charter school is a separate code of the school law written in that we have to be a part of. Transportation costs and mandates about who and how we have to transport individuals are not always financially prudent, but are required by state law. When we go back in history and we look at, of these costs, what have these costs amounted to, which in 2023 was $28 million, and in 2012 was only $12 million who's funding them. The blue represents what the state is funding, the red represents what the federal government is funding, and the green represents what our local taxpayer dollars are funding. So these state mandates are really driving school expenditures to a certain extent, and the amount in which they're funded is continually being pushed down to the local government. So I think that's an important story to tell. Here's a graphical representation of the PSERS rate, which now sits at 34%. Because of a solid market return in the past 3 years, and because as a result of COVID, there's been a flat rate, which has been helpful to our budget, obviously. And last but not least, I'd like to present this chart because it really helps show structural stability of the district, and even moving this out into 2029, where I think the district is headed. So if you look back in 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, the red line representing our expenditure trend line exceeded our revenues, and we were moving in a very negative direction. That was reversed course very quickly. The goal obviously is, as a nonprofit, to keep our revenues just above expenditures without overtaxing our residents. And that will be the goal going forward, to try and match that as close as possible. Before moving on, any questions on expenditures? All right, so looking back at history again. Looking at the Act 1 index versus Cheltenham School District tax increases in almost every year since 2011, 2012, the school district has been able to keep taxes lower than the Act 1 index, which is a measure of wage growth within the state of Pennsylvania. The same holds true this year. It's worth noting that when your market value aid ratio exceeds 4, the district becomes eligible for adjusted index, which happened in 1920 and again happened in 25-26. And this market value personal income aid ratio, again, just as a refresher, is a ratio of the market value of taxable property and personal income per household to student district. So you want this number to be as low as possible, not as high as possible. And it's been relatively stable for the past 5 years. So our Act 1 index for 25-26 is 4.7%, of which, of course, we won't need going into next year. Earlier, we briefly mentioned the homestead exclusion. So way back when the state adopted into law, gambling revenues would be used to offset property taxes. when there were 3 casinos versus 50 casinos, the school district still received roughly $3.5 million until they finally changed the allotment in 22-23. Since then, we've seen a number of increases, and to date, we're seeing another increase as the certification was released on May 1st, just last week, and Cheltenham's allotment was $5,070,000. So all homestead properties, all 7,827 homestead properties will receive homestead relief on their tax bill. So what does a 3% increase mean on the average tax bill? So looking at the median assessment in Cheltenham of $143,170, that would mean roughly $235 a year or $20 a month, not including the roughly $50 increase from homestead. For a medium home assessment of $200,000, what would this look like? $329 a year or $27 a month. So looking at your assessment, helping determine the impact on each taxpayer is the reason for this slide. Before I move on, any questions on the Act 1 index or the homestead funds or yes?
Any questions from the board first? Clarifying question on the homestead. So if you could go back to that slide. So functionally speaking, that is, if we did not raise, if we had a 0% tax increase, this increase of allotment of around $350,000 would functionally result in a tax decrease to a homestead.
That is correct.
Right, so they'd see a lower tax bill. So in other words, this change for people who have homestead properties means that if we do a 3% increase, their experience would be a 2.7% increase.
Would be less, yeah.
Okay, that's good context.
And for those who do not know if they're a homestead property, you can check your tax bills right on your tax bill. It's too late to file for this year. Every December, the district sends out a mailing to all residents of the township encouraging those to sign up. And that's part of the homestead process.
Second question is around the median slide. One is a nitpick and the other is, but it's a genuine question, which is which of those is the median home assessment?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the oddball one is the
So
median.
that is the median. The other ones are just example home assessment.
Correct.
We could ditch the word median, but 143, and that is the current median. Cool.
Yes,
Stat class, that's the one in the middle.
this is the certified median released by the Board of Assessments.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it was a copy paste.
All good.
I think I did that last year too.
Thank you very much for those clarifications.
And I always like to put this in context. So the point of this slide is to show that Cheltenham is not unique in what it's experiencing. And looking at most of these numbers are proposed final budget numbers that I found issued by other school districts in the county. You can see some proposed final budgets are 8%. A lot of proposed final budgets are just sticking right to the index. And some are extraordinarily low. I can imagine Norristown's is probably low because they were the large recipient of tax equity and tax adjustment money. But for the most part, almost everybody is looking at our 3% increase. I also think it's important to point out our 5-year change and our 10-year change. I ranked it by 10-year change. So over the long term, Cheltenham has increased taxes less than the vast majority of school districts in. I think it's important context. Any questions on this slide?
Not this up, sorry, thanks. Particularly, but I guess context around it. So I think the next one was the timeline. Do you have more content?
Yeah, next one's
Yeah.
time.
You said the adequacy funds is what you were talking about with Norristown?
Yeah, there's a tax equity and there's adequacy. There's two pieces. I believe they
I think they are, but but they don't have the tax equity part yet, right? So what we're seeing here, you were saying is connected to the adequacy.
The tax equity required a resolution tax.
That wouldn't, break the deals. Interesting. So, I mean, I guess that kind of gets to, I've asked about this a couple times, but we are including it in our budget. But does it, and correct me if I'm using the term wrong, but does it essentially just sit unencumbered, those funds, and we're not technically using them, we're just accounting for them?
So last year we got, we were awarded $1.1 million of tax equity that was approved after we adopted our budget. And the requirements of that tax equity was to be draft resolution compliant with the law. So because of the timing, we weren't able to draft our resolution to use it in the 2024-25 school year. So we received that money sitting as a liability on our balance sheet and will be available for next year. So what you're seeing in this budget is last year's $1.1 million available after our resolution to use it.
Got it. Okay, so that's connected.
And we will, the way the budget is written now, we will get another 1.1 million that is not in this budget available for next year.
And we'd have to go through that same process again. Oh,
That is,
to say, hey, here's how we're actually going to use.
since the law is in place, I'm suggesting we draft the resolution in June. So even if the budget is late, it becomes available.
Or like I said before. Appreciate that. And correct me if I'm wrong, yeah, but I think I know there's the whole point of preliminary versus final and, you know, all of the context that comes along with that. But I think previously we were looking at somewhere around 1.7 or 2%
In the preliminary
in the
budget,
tax increase.
yes.
Yeah, and so just, this is more of a reflection to make sure we're accurate. You're saying a lot of that or all of that is tied to, part of it is contractual increases, but a lot of it is the out of school placement. With IUU costs
Within the last 6 months.
within the last 6
We've
months.
seen it.
Which, to the point earlier, I think we began a lot of apps over the last few months, which I think, you know, it brings all the two questions that we talked about a little earlier as well. So that's helpful to understand, especially if we have folks tracking this publicly from our community, and as we talk about it with our community, what that actually means, the 1.7 versus the 3. But then also, as we consider something that we were asked over the weekend, if I could kind of step into our community, the three of us are running for re-election, but this isn't political, but something we were asking about is like, again, so what are principals asking for and how does that become, you know, actually part of the budget? And then it got me thinking, as you were talking about that 4% books and supplies, and a lot of it's becoming technical, you know, platforms and things like that. So really, it's just a comment of how we might start to how we might communicate that either as a board or as an administration. Like, what schools need, how are we planning to fund those things in our upcoming budget? And thanks for the continued diligence in your role and the team.
Any other questions from the board? And this is about because this is the conclusion of the budget, other than the timeline, but this is the meat and potatoes have been presented. Any questions about the proposed final budget?
Just one question. Who determines the PSERS contribution? The state.
Separate actuarial board. So even more exciting than an accounting part.
Thank you.
So before we move on, I don't want this budget presentation to say, hey, this is a special ed issue. This is a wage and special ed issue. It's just one that has ended up higher than the other. That was the issue. It's a natural progression.
What can you say more? Like, Addis? What do you mean?
Meaning the preliminary budget, we were looking for a one and change tax increase. We had some negative experience on the special ed side, but I don't want this budget focus to be special ed is the issue in the district. It's just, we need a tax increase because wages are driving upward. As a result, still of inflationary pressure from 2 years ago, we have some additional special ed expenditures. So I guess I'm not trying to make a scapegoat out of this.
Appreciate that. That's an important distinction. Thank you.
And I'll just offer that we know when we are particularly negotiating with CEA, the teachers union, that the outcomes of that negotiation are a major driver of what our tax increases are going to need to be for the next several years. And the economic realities during our most recent negotiation were a lot of inflation happening around us at far more than 3%, economic uncertainty, and frankly, a district budget that was not facing a deficit and in fact had a surplus. So I think that the contract that was negotiated was fair, but the reality of that contract is we're not going to be able to look at 0 to 1% tax increases while also being fiscally responsible. I do want to ask about the assumptions around the state budget. Are there any, because I know it's prudent to be conservative and assume the worst case. I'm curious, particularly around charter school costs and also around the potential for an increase in allocation. Is there any of that represented in this budget, or is it assumed that it's really just the status quo?
So the Auditor General has been releasing a lot of information about charter school tuition. And there seems to be a greater push than there's ever been for some charter school reform. But there's been pushes for charter school reform since I started this job. And I'm concerned that if we bank on it, it doesn't happen. We're banking on something that hasn't occurred for a decade. I'm very hopeful that something does happen that would represent significant savings for the district, their current proposal of flat cap. Cyber school tuition, because of that 3 million, the vast majority, I think 85% of our charter school students are attending cyber charter school. So it's not like there's even a split. We would see the dramatic drop immediately. And then with the proposed state budget, there was not a large increase to basic ed subsidy. There was not a large, very nominal increase to that and special education subsidy. It seems as if all the money was split in tax equity supplement.
So with how does that, does any of that translate to the budget you just presented us in either direction, or does this budget assume no changes to cyber charter costs?
This budget assumes no changes to cyber costs other than what was implemented last year in terms of tuition adjustment. And this budget assumes that we aren't getting the de minimis increases to the basic ed subsidy and special ed subsidy. And it doesn't take into account the potential $1.1 million of additional tax equity.
So we can cross our fingers that there will be more news about that between now and when we would pass this budget. But if not, any assumption to the contrary would be risk, because if it didn't pan out, then we would not have raised to a level that meets our anticipated expenditures.
Correct. And I don't know if it would be the wisest to recognize two tax equity payments in 1 year, knowing that one's going to go away the next year. It's almost like kicking the can down the road. And I know we have some large settlements, real estate tax appeal settlements outstanding that are going to require attention. That are also one-off payments.
My grandmother used to call it not counting your chickens before they hatch.
Right. Yes. We are full of good idioms today.
Yes.
Thank you. And you know, this is obviously one of the most important conversations that this committee has. So thank you for the robust presentation. Thank you for listening to, being very responsive to our questions. And my next question is really the next slide, is how many more steps, how many more conversations about this budget will there be?
Sure. And before we move on, just keeping this slide in mind, given that Cheltenham has the highest tax rate in the county, I'm cognizant of that. And the idea of conservatism, I try not to be as conservative, try not to be incredibly conservative, but we have a massive surplus every year, knowing that this township already has a very high tax burden. So because we went from a lower 1.75 preliminary to higher, means I'm trying to make things as tight as possible, which is a different strategy than a lot of places would take who have sufficient funds. All right, so June 10th is the June legislative meeting. That will be the goal for approval of the district's final budget. Last year, we did a special meeting at the end of June because we saw more changes to state funding than had occurred in decades. So this year's budget is seemingly following last year's budget playbook at the state level. So it seems somewhat more predictable. And I'm not hearing a lot of words of opposition from either side to the current budget. Really only the federal budget piece has some uncertainty to it that seems to have calmed itself down to a certain degree. So June 10th will be the budget approval date. In May, we will approve this as a proposed final budget so that we can release it for public inspection, which would be the full-length version of the budget with every function object detail laid out for public inspection, and then also post that in public circulation, in addition to posting our budget on the district's website. That gives everyone ample time to review it before the school board takes its final vote.
You have one that I should have asked earlier. In past years, maybe by this time, we would have learned about resignation or retirement numbers, correct? Has that deadline passed for teachers to indicate?
April 15th is the contractual deadline for notification of retirement. Yes.
Okay, and so I guess it's not in this presentation, so I'm not asking for the numbers now, but I am maybe offline. I'm curious where things panned out and because that has been part of these conversations in the past, because sometimes there are 10 retirements and it's determined that only 5 of those positions need to be filled, and that represents some offsetting of the contractual increases. Obviously, year after year of that, eventually you get to the point where that's no longer, attritional savings are no longer realistic, but I'm curious if we've reached that.
So I think we look at our staffing budget like it's chisel and stone. We build to it. And if we do add to it, honestly, it's with great labor. And we're always looking to push the envelope in where our staffing number can be so we can reduce it as it is our highest cost.
8.
It's a modest number this year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the perfect segue for the retirement celebration, 25 years of service.
Okay.
Celebrations of the next 2.
Yes, it's 8 and 8 being recognized next week for 25 years and 8 being recognized for retirement.
Any, just in case there's questions from the public, I don't know if I don't see any raised hands. Well, I guess I wouldn't see it from this.
No, I don't see it.
I see none.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Ms.
Just
Barr.
clarifying quickly, so Mr. Sweigard, the plan will be to approve this next week as the preliminary budget. It'll go out, for public consumption, and then,
That's on year.
and then and in the June legislative meeting at the normal date is when we plan to approve it, unless something, because it has to be adopted by the end of the month. But it gives us room if there is some kind of
Yep, June 30th is.
exciting news I would hope in our favor, but thank you.
Good.
Yes, exciting good news, no bad news.
All right, there are no other questions on the budget. I want the next topic, which is traffic calming measures around school district properties. So this topic came up as a result of concerns about dangerous traffic conditions around our elementary schools, conditions caused by driver behavior, and how best to deal with driver behavior around our elementary schools. So the proposal involves adding speed cushions, signage, refresh pavement markings, and raise crosswalks around those school buildings to slow down drivers and increase safety for our students who walk to school and who go to school. And there's an estimated cost to those measures of $123,000 that was provided by the township, as they were providing the in-house services to complete that work. And the request was that the cost be split with the school district. And the school district having a new revenue source coming from Bus Patrol, which is stop arm enforcement around our school buses, and the idea being that the stop arm enforcement money, a desirable place for that to go would be towards additional bus safety and traffic safety for students.
Can I ask a question about the enforcement fines? Are we actually collecting on those fines?
Yes, we are.
We are, okay.
Yes.
I'm wondering if this also, these measures include like anything that's not necessarily speed cushions. I'm thinking that some of our elementary schools have like a drop-off lane. Others, there's not really space for that. I'm thinking of Myers. And if or how it could like happen just, I'm even thinking just in drop off in the morning, because there's definitely a safety issue. Going all the way around the building. And could the township, like how would that work if we proposed, or somebody at the school proposed, I don't even know who would propose, to have a drop off lane where there's currently, you know, like no parking between here and here during school hours. Is that a possibility? Is this not the venue to discuss that kind of an option?
We aren't in charge of the roads around the buildings. So, and I don't think the township is in charge of every road around the buildings, some of them are state roads. So probably the township would be the best way, and we could approach the conversation through the liaison meeting.
Okay.
About potentially what we're proposing, and you know, get the feedback from the township who is well versed in this.
Okay.
And I'll add a point of context because it's also just related to. It strikes me that there's a division of responsibility versus stakeholder role. And to me, when I see this, we are a stakeholder in a critical stakeholder in the traffic calming measures around our schools. It is generally the responsibility of the township to implement, change, you know, pass whatever needs to be passed to change what signs are rendered in different places or install those speed cushions. But it does occur to me that the question you're raising, we are in a better position than the township to know what the problem is. And the township is in the position to know the best way to solve that problem potentially. Or so that's where liaison might be a reasonable place to raise the issue, but I doubt that that will be solved in the liaison group so much as potentially leading to a follow-up conversation among staff members who are both better spot for it. And I just wanted to say, will we have to vote on that 123 collaboration?
Yes, so it would take the form as a voting for a funding contribution to the township.
And would that be?
It would be
half of that?
So it would probably appear as the administration recommends the board approved release of up to where we have this for, I think that was way off, for you know, additional traffic safety measures in the township. But I do have additional slides on this.
Okay, great.
So I have, just looking at a rough sketch of where these traffic calming measures would occur. So the smaller triangles represent speed cushions, which would occur on Front Street. I'm guessing Ashmore is a state road and not a township road, so that is not included in the plan. Around Glenside, 2 speed cushions and an elevated crosswalk at the building level. Myers, speed cushions all around Myers. And on Winco, speed cushions and a raised crosswalk to help control traffic. So the amount of this maximum contribution is less than what was collected by BusPatrol just last year.
Sorry, this is not a question, but just a comment. Thank you to the township and to the liaison committee and whoever else was involved in moving this forward. because I think it speaks to people who come through our township that we value the safety of our kids in our schools, and slow down, slow down, slow down. You're where there are children, so thank you.
Any other board comments?
Thank you, Ms. Blitzstein. I will just give, as being a member of the liaison group that, and we've been discussing this for some time, just a shout out to all of the township staff and commissioners, but especially to Commissioner Brockington, who has been working diligently on this project for a number of years, really wanting this. It was a major goal of his, so just thanks to him for driving it, the project. Thank you.
And I also wanted to just highlight that, particularly when the township and the school district were having independent, with conversation, but independent major capital planning projects, a lot of the community wanted to see more collaboration. And one of the challenges is that there's not blatant overlap in what can be effectively collaborated on. This is an example of where there can be collaboration, and I think it's good to see as a member of the board, but also as a community member, that these conversations are happening. So, and I want to give a plug to the principals who physically act as traffic calming measures on pickup and drop off mornings right now. So I'm glad that we're going to be assisting in their efforts.
All right, and the last thing on the agenda is just the next two legislative meetings and the main topics will be discussed at those meetings. Next week, we talked about the traffic calming measure. We talked about the proposed final budget. We also opened one bid for an HVAC service agreement. It is very difficult to staff HVAC personnel right now because of the high demand and low quantity of individuals. So we somewhat rely on a service arrangement with a local HVAC company, Chadwick in this case. So we reissued a bid to reshop and get a new price. And Chadwick did go in as the lowest price. So the agreement is $50,000 annually for 2 years, and they were the lowest bidder. Any questions on the legislative meetings and agenda items next month?
Okay, so the HVAC.
Sorry.
Yeah. The HVAC service agreement is to just have them like on call. Like, what is that? What does that cover?
So I'm going to pass the ball.
Okay.
I mean, it covers the basic routine maintenance of HVAC. Specifically,
what they're going to be doing is taking care of all of our major components, i.e. our boilers, all of our HVAC equipment. So if we have a issue with them, they would actually come in and help us solve the problem or repair or replace.
And we're not like paying them per call, per hour. We're paying them with that agreement, and they're who comes to fix
that is the
the
baseline.
broken parts.
That is the baseline service. But let's say we have a freezer, which is not part of the maintenance agreement, and the freezer breaks, and we need a repair, and it comes in at $8,000. We shop around, we try and get a better price. Chadwick is oftentimes better price than they perform repair. So that's outside of the scope of their regular maintenance agreement. Is an addition.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, as we saw in earlier slides, the facilities meeting, stuff like that happens quite a bit.
Any other board questions? Being none. Huge. Is there a motion to adjourn? I wish I could.
Still move.
Let's see. Is there a second?
Second. So nobody can say anything.
All in favor?
Oh, yeah.
Aye. Stay here.